Welcome to another Silicon Wafers episode, and this one is on an issue that is absolutely crucial to the maintenance of Russia's war economy and war machine, and that is the shadow fleet. Moscow has been using old, uninsured ships to transport oil, and is estimated their capacity has increased by 70% since last year. This is despite a recent crackdown on insurers and shipping companies that are apparently enabling Moscow to circumvent Western sanctions. Shares in shipbroker Braemar fell after the Financial Times of London released a report on the Russian shadow fleet and how it's using ancient vessels to move oil beyond the reach of Western sanctions. The shadow fleet is estimated to consist of more than 400 vessels that are moving about 4 million barrels of oil per day. The Financial Times alleged involvement of Braemar, causing its stock to fall 11% in 2 days. London has long been a global centre of the maritime industry, and Braemar, founded in 1982, is one of the industry's leading brokers. Their business model is to match buyers and sellers of vessels in return for a percentage of the purchase price. It would be scandalous indeed if they were involved in brokering to build up Russia's shadow fleet that it uses to prop up its war economy and the war machine that is focused on the annihilation of Ukraine. Oil that Russia transports using this fleet generates billions of dollars a year in additional revenue. The FT reported that at least 25 of the Shadow Fleet vessels had been purchased by a British accountant on behalf of Eiger Shipping DMCC, the Dubai-based shipping arm of Lukoil, Russia's second largest oil producer. Eiger, it is alleged, financed the acquisitions by paying in advance to charter the vessels. The accountant's lawyers and another person told the FT Braemar was fully aware the vessels were being acquired for and financed by Eiger. For every transaction that Braemar considers undertaking, it conducts all appropriate due diligence with know your customer checks, legal compliance, and regulatory adherence, said Braemar in a statement. It is not alleged the transactions have broken any laws, and that, of course, is also alarming that after 3 years of genocidal warfare, that such loopholes still exist in maritime law. How can this happen? Lukoil has been under US sanctions since 2014, but neither Eiger Shipping DMCC nor its Dubai-based owner, Litasco Middle East DMCC, is a sanctions-hit entity. Dubai-based companies are not required to comply with the West's restrictions if they do not use G7 financing or services. The sanctions regime needs to tighten up quickly, and there are some signs that this is actually starting to happen. But of course, much more should have been done and much sooner. Western governments are increasingly homing in on individuals and companies that have helped to assemble and operate the Shadow Fleet. 7 of the 25 vessels originally acquired by the British accountant have since been hit with sanctions by the EU and the UK, as have apparently 2 companies that previously managed many of the ships. 44 European leaders, including UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer, pledged to target the Shadow Fleet's ships and facilitators in a July statement and called for the support of the maritime industry, including ship brokers. We urge ship owners and operators, the maritime insurance industry, shipbrokers, and other relevant maritime stakeholders to adhere to their relevant obligations and support the prevention, detection, and reporting of shadow fleet activities. The leaders are quoted as saying whether their words will be heeded without follow-up actions. Well, we'll have to wait and see. The shadow fleet, however, represents an ecological time bomb. An expert said as a matter of when, not if, a major catastrophe occurs in European coastal waters. In May last year, an aging tanker loaded with Russian oil dropped anchor 2 nautical miles off Denmark's coast. Its engine had failed, leaving it without power for 6 hours. The ultimate owner of the elderly ship, Canis Power, was unknown. The vessel, long past its best and what would be considered a normal commercial lifespan. An incident spill would have resulted in up to 300,000 barrels of oil entering the sea. It would be unclear in such a circumstance who, if anyone, would cover the cleanup costs. Canis Power was added to UK and EU sanctions list in June, but because of offshore corporate structures, Western officials have struggled to identify who owns the ship, how they were acquired, and who oversees their operations. The FT investigated to shed light on the process. It shows that Lukoil used its shipping arm to finance a 74-year-old British accountant called John Ormerod to acquire Canis Power and at least 24 other second-hand tankers between December 22 and August 23. The total cost was estimated to be more than $700 million. It's alleged each ship was bought by a different special purpose company incorporated by Ormerod in the Marshall Islands. Lukoil's Dubai-based Eiger Shipping DMCC provided the funds by paying in advance to charter the vessels. The FT claims that Dubai-based companies linked to a Karachi-born British shipping magnate named Mohammed Tahir Lakhani were appointed to manage the ships, according to people with knowledge of such structures. Through such a complex set of arrangements, Lukoil was able to fund the acquisition of a fleet of vessels while hiding its involvement from public view. As a reminder, Lukoil is Russia's second largest oil producer. At a conservative estimate, this fleet would have been able to transport $7.2 billion worth of oil exports. The shocking thing is that these transactions may not have actually broken any laws. Prior to Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, Russian oil exports mainly relied on Western tankers, which dominate the global shipping fleet. The US, EU, UK, and other G7 countries soon banned companies under their jurisdiction from providing ships insurance or financing for Russian exports, unless the oil was sold at a discount to market prices. It was in response to that that Russia set about creating its own fleet of vessels registered in countries outside of the G7. In the final months of 2022, the tanker market boomed as Russian companies and their intermediaries set about buying second-hand vessels. Western owners seized a rare opportunity to dispose of old tankers at premium prices. The risk, of course, is that Putin's sanction-busting shadow fleet will end up spilling oil all over the world to fund his criminal war. The magazine Politico has run a major piece on the risks and practices of the shadow fleet. It lists examples such as the Innova, a vessel the size of the Eiffel Tower that caused a discharge of oil into the sea. The tanker was at the time hauling 1 million barrels of sanctioned oil from Russia on its way to a refinery in India. The Coast Guard did little to investigate, and there were no repercussions from the incident. The vessel continues to trade oil today. The Innova is just one of hundreds of vessels in the aging and poorly maintained grey fleet, helping Russia to avoid sanctions and the price caps at which it is legally allowed to export oil. The ships are spreading environmental harm and raising the risk of catastrophe, but without any consequences. Swedish Foreign Minister Marie Malmer Stenergard told Politico the ships posed a significant danger to the marine environment. The incidents illustrate this, she said. Discharges from vessels alleged to form part of the shadow fleet have been identified everywhere, from Thailand to Vietnam to Italy and Mexico. The tankers also pass through busy shipping corridors like the Red Sea and the Panama Canal, meaning any serious accident could rupture international trade routes. The oil spills and risks of slicks are horrendous, said Isaac Levy, a shadow fleet expert at think tank, the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air, CREA. Beyond the environmental damage, some of which is irreversible, it's a huge impact to coastal states that have to bear the cost of cleaning this up. In short, it's a ticking time bomb. But how can democratic countries choke off Moscow's revenues while avoiding disastrous ramifications. When sanctions were first imposed on Russia in 2022, they aimed to throttle a critical financial lifeline for the Kremlin, which relies on oil and gas exports for almost half of its budget. 2 years later, the measures have largely fallen short of their objectives. This is due to Moscow's willingness to break every rule and convention in international trade, but also because it has found many willing accomplices. Moscow has found creative workarounds. It relabeled crude oil to mask its origin and organized an ever-growing fleet of over 600 vessels with ownership obscured by shell companies. It effectively used this to dodge the $60 per barrel price cap set by the G7. But these tactics are not new. They have been adopted by Iran and Venezuela for similar purposes over many years. We've known this for a long time and monitored the ways in which it plays out. So why were we not more prepared for Russia to do the same? These schemes have led to around 80% of Moscow's seaborne crude being transported on vessels outside Western control. Meanwhile, the cash has kept flowing into Russia's war economy, powering its war machine. Lloyd's List defined these tankers as having no known insurance, obscure ownership, and mostly were built 15 years ago or more. They are unsurprisingly classified as high risk by engineers. That leaves them more vulnerable to technical problems that could affect their steering, structural integrity, and seaworthiness. There is also a collision risk. In July, a Shadow Fleet vessel hit another tanker in Malaysian waters, causing both to catch fire. The risk caused by the Shadow Fleet is global in scale, but the problem is particularly acute in Europe, where the Dark Fleet is an accident waiting to happen, according to Bachmann, given that many unregulated ships pass through EU waters after leaving Russia's Baltic and Siberian ports. Intentional overboard discharge of waste oil slops is illegal under MARPOL, an international treaty that aims to curb shipping pollution. Signatories of the treaty include many EU countries, Russia and Vietnam, the country where the Innova we mentioned earlier was registered at the time, its so-called flag state. But the Innova is far from the only ship to have left a trail of pollution in its wake, and not the only one to have gotten away with it either. Action will always be considered where there is evidence for the potential for environmental or social harm. This was not the case here, a MARPOL spokesman said. On February 18th, satellites spotted another 47-kilometer long slick off the Italian coast, matching coordinates of another Shadow Fleet tanker, the Aruna Gulke. That tanker, flagged in the Marshall Islands, was carrying ballast, seawater that keeps the ship afloat, from the port of Ravenna in Italy to the southern Russian port of Novorossiysk. It's unlikely the discharge was ballast, however, since seawater would not be visible from space, implying another violation. Similarly, the Italian Coast Guard did not carry out an inspection of the ship, and to evade follow-up, the ship soon changed its name and designated manager. I'm absolutely convinced that what you have noticed is the tip of the iceberg, said Bachmann. These ships are designed to transport sanctioned oil as cheaply as possible, and there is absolutely no regard for conventional marine standards. Evidence of spills is leading to fresh calls for government action, but options for stopping the Shadow Fleet are limited. As we've discussed in previous episodes, for instance, the one recently with Elizabeth Braw, there seems to be no adequate mechanism for Western governments to clamp down on this. In peacetime, there are no instruments that allow ships to be boarded or forced to comply with international standards. Any such move by a Western government could be seen as a declaration of war by Russia. It's obviously outrageous, said one EU diplomat, on the condition of anonymity. Coastal European countries like Italy and the UK have the responsibility to take extra efforts to investigate ships when they are linked to Russia, the diplomat added. In this case, it was a failure to follow up to the reports of a spill by the UK and Italian governments that was specifically called out, but they are far from being alone. If the vessels referred to are involved in irregular or high-risk shipping practices or contributing to Russia's war effort, they run a high risk of being added to the EU's sanction regime, Swedish Foreign Minister Stennergaard told Politico. But it does seem that many of these vessels are falling through the cracks. The UK has slapped restrictions on individual tankers. Last month, it added 10 more Shadow Fleet vessels to its sanctions list on top of 15 already penalised. And sanctioning individual tankers has proved to be actually pretty effective as a move, said Levi. Those ships blacklisted by the US saw their ability to trade oil drop 90% 3 months after being penalised. But things are not happening fast enough or in an agile enough fashion. This has led to Ukraine's foreign minister calling on Europe to fight Russia's shadow fleet of tankers. Andrei Sybiha urged European countries to act against Russia's shadow fleet of tankers transporting Russian oil, which he said pose an existential threat to Europe while continuing to earn billions on energy exports to Europe and through European countries for Russia. He argued these funds are subsequently used to finance the Kremlin's war machine. Europe can and must deprive Russia of its bloody energy reserves, Sybiha said. To conclude, it is indeed high time Europe took real action to block this shadow fleet. Putting pressure on Russia's war budget is a vital part of any victory and peace plan for those who are seriously supporting Ukraine. It will save lives and the environment and is just as important as the provision of munitions to Ukraine. In fact, tightening the grip around Russia's economic windpipe is vital in choking off its ability to fund its war economy and its war machine.